to Matthew chapter 18. We'll be studying that tonight, Matthew 18. First question, of course, deals with kind of at least one of the main topics that we're going to look at tonight. Kind of a think about it, introduction question, discussion question, maybe a wake-up question. Maybe that's the way to label it. But anyway, the question is, why do you think that our culture is so competitive? And by competitive, of course, I mean obsessed with being the best and the greatest. Why do you think that's the case? Would you agree that our culture is obsessed with that? Anybody wait?
In sports, at least, we are.
Okay. Yeah, in sports, would you say it's that way when it comes to employment too? People obsessed with being the best and the greatest. They want to be at the top. Pretty common.
A percentage of the people, not all.
Okay. Okay. What are some other areas? Everybody have to have the biggest and the best car, biggest house, nicest clothes. People like that in our society. I don't know what society you guys live in, but the one that I live in, I think most people are wired that way, aren't they? Go ahead, Daryl.
Well, and the question is asked, why do you think?
Yeah.
Why? And it kind of popped in my head that we're told repeatedly throughout our whole life, we live in the best and the greatest country in the world. So that kind of flows over to everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's probably a number of reasons why that's the case, but it's and again, like Daryl pointed out, it's not a wrong. There's not a wrong way to answer because it's why do you think? So it's really your idea or your opinion or your take on things. But I personally, I think to make life meaningful, you have to have a purpose of some kind. And if we reject the idea of God and serving Him as our purpose, and that makes my life meaningful, I think you got to come up with something else that gives your life purpose, and gives a meaning to it. Now, it may not be a deep purpose, but trying to be the best and the greatest at everything that you do would make your life meaningful, wouldn't it? It would give you a purpose or a goal in mind. And I think that's the way that a lot of people are wired in the world today. It kind of assigns a meaning and a purpose, a value to their life. Of course, again, it's not a deep value when you're talking about having the most money or being the best at sports or anything like that. But it certainly assigns some kind of value and meaning and purpose to life. And so I think that's just kind of human nature if you're not going to accept the idea, like Gary pointed out. Not everybody's like that. But if you certainly reject the idea of God and serving Him and living for Him in this life, you reject that as your purpose, then you got to come up with something, don't you? You got to have something to make your life meaningful or give yourself a goal. So, anybody else got a different idea or take? Yes, sir.
Well, I've always kind of thought that doing our best was one of the things we do if we're trying to live for God.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't want, parable of the talents. He gives us so much, we better do something with it.
Right. And there's a principle, like you said in the Bible, that you do the best with what you have, but it doesn't necessarily teach us that you have to be the best at everything that you do. And I think that's kind of a different mindset than the world, because that's really their goal, isn't it? To be the best at what they do. Like Dennis pointed out, we just got to use what God gave us and don't worry about where that puts us in the ranks. That's not our purpose. But certainly doing the best of what we have is a Christian duty and goal. Anybody else? All right, well, the reason that that question is asked, if you've read Matthew chapter 18, you know that the disciples of Jesus had this discussion among themselves more than one time as to who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Now, you might stop and think, because that's how chapter 18 is kind of introduced to us. Why might they be thinking about this particular point or asking this question or having this dispute, as Mark says in Mark chapter 9, at this particular point? Well, kind of think back to several things that Jesus had said himself and that we've studied last week. Remember that a couple weeks ago, Jesus made the statement in front of the disciples and all the people that there were some people that were standing there that would not die till they had seen the kingdom of God come with power. And so they got to believe in their minds the kingdom of God is coming. And so it's got to be, again, in the forefront. Last week we studied about Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. And remember, they knew that the Messiah would come, but they also knew the prophecy before it how the scribes interpreted it was that Elijah would come, but he was to come, the forerunner was to come in the spirit and the power of Elijah. And remember, Jesus told them, Elijah has already come. And so now they're thinking again, the kingdom's here. The Messiah is coming. It's right around the corner. Jesus is going to be king. And so now the discussion and the question becomes, which one of us is going to be the greatest in this kingdom where Jesus is going to be this king? And so that's the discussion that begins there in Matthew chapter 18, verses 1 through 9. So question number 2, kind of already answered that for you. What question did the disciples ask Jesus? That was the question of who was going to be the greatest. And when they were thinking about the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, what do you think they were thinking about? What kind of terms were they thinking in? Yeah, they weren't necessarily talking about who's going to have the best character in the kingdom of heaven, right? Or who was going to be, as far as quality goes, who was going to be the greatest in this kingdom of heaven. Their thought was power, wasn't it? Their thought was position. Their thought was ranking within that kingdom. And frankly, what kind of kingdom were they expecting? Well, they were looking for a physical kingdom, weren't they? They were looking for a physical king, and they were looking for a physical position within that empire where each one of them would sit. And so when that kingdom comes and Jesus is king, which one of us is going to be the greatest? Which one of us is going to have the highest ranking? So Jesus, again, you kind of couple some of these accounts, different accounts throughout Matthew, Mark, and Luke and John. You'll see some of these details that I'm talking about. But Jesus perceived that they've been having this discussion. So he asked them, what were you guys talking about on the way over here? What were you arguing about back there? And Mark says they were too ashamed to tell him that at first. But eventually, Jesus knew what they were talking about. And so the discussion came forth, who was going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So imagine them, here they are, and they've been having this argument. And they've had it before. This isn't the first time they've ever had this discussion or debate or argument, however you want to label it. And now it's come to the forefront, and Jesus is addressing it himself. And so as he begins talking about this question, how do you think that they anticipated Jesus would answer them? Or answer this question?
What are their names?
I would imagine they were waiting for a name, were you? I would imagine they were anticipating Jesus is going to throw this name out and tell us, which one of us is going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. But instead, how does Jesus, the two-part question here, question number 2, how did Jesus answer this question that they had?
Taking a child, didn't that?
Okay, he used an illustration, didn't he? But particularly, what words did he speak to them? Yeah, he basically told them two things. Here they were arguing and they were concerned about who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. He says, listen, if you guys don't become converted, and you become like little children, you aren't even going to enter into the kingdom of heaven, you know? You're not, forget about this discussion of who's going to be the greatest. You're not even going to make it into the kingdom. And so the 2 points that Jesus really emphasized to them was the idea of conversion. And what does that mean? What did he mean when he said, unless you're converted? It's the idea of turning around, literally, right? Conversion. So they had to change the way that they thought and the principles that they were operating upon. They just had to completely revamp and turn their thinking around. And that not only applies to, I think, what it takes to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, but I think also Jesus was pointing out they were thinking in physical terms, weren't they? They had to completely change their way of thinking because the kingdom was going to be spiritual in nature if they were ever going to anticipate entering into this kingdom. And so not only did they have to be converted, he said you also have to become like little children. And question number 3 here, what is it specifically that Jesus talks about that we need to emulate? What is it about children that he wants us to emulate? What does he say in verse 4? Humility, right? So when you think about children, and this is kind of an interesting take. Again, I think in our society, we're so obsessed with being the best and the greatest that we kind of push that idea into our children at a very young age. Would you agree with that? But generally speaking, if you ever see children, if they haven't been totally indoctrinated with that idea and, you know, that concept pushed to the forefront of their minds, and you see children out here playing together, are they concerned about who's the greatest? You know, is that their priority? They're just out here having a good time and enjoying each other's company and having fun, right? They're not obsessed with this idea of who's on top, you know, who's the best, who's the greatest. And when you think about a child is very destitute of pride. Now, again, you think about Americans, some children are pretty proud children, but I think it kind of goes back to what's been instilled into their minds, you know, by different influences, maybe by their parents, maybe by media outlets, things like that. But generally speaking, they're destitute of pride. They're very humble. They're teachable. You know, if you sit down with a child and you want to teach them about something, generally speaking, a child's going to listen, aren't they? They're going to listen to what you have to say, and they're going to accept it. Generally speaking, they're obedient. Again, now you have exceptions to the rule in some cases, but generally speaking, when you tell a child what to do, that child's going to do it. And so there are just a number of qualities and characteristics that exhibit to us the humility of a child. And again, Jesus is talking to them. You're going to have to be humble if you're ever going to enter into the kingdom of heaven. You're going to have to be like this little child. You know, you're going to have to change your opinions. You're going to have to change your feelings. You're going to have to be teachable. You're going to have to listen to what I tell you. One of the things that I thought about as I was going through this chapter is, how many times have we read about Jesus just getting frustrated with his disciples because they just won't listen to what he says? You know, they're just not grasping what he's telling them. Or he said, you've seen this. You know, why are you talking in this way when you've seen all these different things? And so there's a lot of moments where Jesus is frustrated with the lack of humility in his disciples, the lack of teachability, the lack of obedience in all these different areas. So they're back here fighting about who's going to be greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And so Jesus, again, uses that as an opportunity to teach them about true greatness in the kingdom of heaven. They're going to have to change the way that they thought about the nature of the kingdom and about the Messiah. Remember when Jesus tells Peter that he's going to die, but he's going to be resurrected. He's going to be put to death by the Gentiles, but he's going to be resurrected the third day. What did Jesus say? Or what did Peter say to Jesus? Do you remember? No, it's not going to happen, right? Jesus said you're going to have to change. You know, you're going to have to turn around. You're going to have to be converted. If you're going to come to this idea of what this kingdom is, of what kind of Messiah I'm going to be, And you're going to have a lot of humility, and you're going to have to be teachable, just like these little children. So, it's when you think about children, I know a lot of times when we use this passage, we kind of refer to newborns or infants, but this child that Jesus was talking about was walking. He could communicate and he could understand, and he listened to what Jesus said, and he came over and he sat down when Jesus told him to do it. But it's just qualities and characteristics that as Christians we're supposed to have too. So question number 4 is this: what do you think prevents us from being more like children, whether it be in our faith or in our obedience or in teachability, whatever areas it be? What do you think it is that as grown-ups keeps us from exhibiting that childlike quality?
We think we got it figured out.
Well, yeah. Well, one of the things is we think we know it all, right? And if you think you know it all, can you tell or teach somebody who knows it all? It's kind of hard, isn't it? Well, it's impossible. It's not until they come to the realization and acceptance that they don't know it all that they'll listen. And so that would be one of those things. What else? Anything else? Pride? Yeah. That's one of those things. It goes back, I think, to this idea and this mindset of a lot of times I think we're focused on the outward appearance. That's where we're really putting all of our time and our energy. A lot of people want to portray this personal image of who they are to everybody else, even within the church. Would you agree with that statement? We have this idea of what we want other people to think about us spiritually, how we want them to perceive us, and who we want them to think that we are. And so we're obsessed with those things. How about possessions? We ever obsessed with those? Yeah, we focus on those things a lot. Position, even within the church, you have those individuals who, they want to be the hero of the play, don't they? They want to be the person where all the focus and all the attention is put upon them, and so once again they're thinking in terms of earthly and fleshly greatness. And so they want to be the ones who are the most honored and the most esteemed, even within the church. So, it's just a material mindset, I think. It's just a focus on the fleshly. And children aren't so concentrated on the physical as sometimes we are as adults. And that's a great quality to have. And as Christians, it's a quality that we should have. So, good lesson for us from children. All right, let's talk a little bit about the parable of the lost sheep. If you read verses 10 through 14, you'll read about that. I think probably most, if not all of us, have read that before, or at least studied it, or heard about it, or are familiar with it. Remember the story about the man who has 100 sheep. One of them becomes lost, and of course he leaves the 99 behind in order to find the sheep, and a lost sheep. And when he finds that sheep, he rejoices more over finding that lost sheep than he does over the 99 that are safe in the fold. So I want us to think about, again, we've read most of these things in the New Testament. They're not anything new, probably know them forward and backward and inside and out and everything else. But I want us to think more about the application here tonight. And it begins with a very simple question. And the first one is, what lengths would you go to recover a lost piece of jewelry? Now, if you're a man, I don't even wear any jewelry. I don't even wear my wedding ring. And that was because when we got married, I worked at a golf course and I worked around a lot of machinery, and rings and machinery don't work well together. I just never wore one. But personally, I don't have any jewelry, but maybe some of you women have some precious jewelry. What if you lost your wedding ring? What lengths would you go to try to find it? What would you be willing to do? Would you just say, it's just a wedding ring, they make 1,000 of them every day, no big deal?
I'll look everywhere.
Okay? You spend some time looking. Would you go a lot of different places? Would you talk to people? Would you ask about it? I mean, what all would you be willing to do? Well, obviously, it's a pretty valuable piece to you, right? And not just talking about money, but sentimental value. Then you would invest a lot of time trying to find something like that if you lost it. How about a missing purse? Or guys, if you lost your wallet, what lengths would you go to try to find it? Would you just say, no big deal, they make wallets every day. I'll just get me another one. I think we'd spend a lot of time looking for it, don't you? I think we'd go a lot of different places, we'd backtrack, we'd do a lot of thinking. We'd talk to a lot of different people, we'd ask questions, things like that. How about a misplaced document? You ever misplace a car title or something like that? I did that one time and turned the house upside down, back and forth, I don't know how many times. But I spent a lot of time and put a lot of effort into finding that misplaced document. How about this? How about a child? How about if your child went missing? Would you put any effort into finding them? Would you knock on people's doors? Would you ask questions? Would you talk to strangers? I mean, would you ever give up totally? I don't think any of us would. Now, that's just to illustrate the idea that something that has great value to us, if we lose it, we're willing to invest a lot of time and energy and effort into finding that which is lost. Why did Jesus come to this earth? To save the lost. Right? He was looking for people who were lost, wasn't he? He was trying to find them. He was searching them out. And he was trying to save them, wasn't he? That was his goal in coming to this life. That was the whole purpose of his living. People thought it was weird that he was out here talking to strangers and talking to publicans and sinners and, all these lost people, all these non-religious people. But that's why Jesus came to this earth. And that was the purpose of his living here upon this earth. So you think about one of the works that God has given us today, or one of the works of Christ that we're supposed to continue as the church, is to seek and to save the lost, isn't it? So what does that mean? Does that mean if we know somebody who's lost, we should say, it's no big deal. There's a lot of lost people out in the world today.
But we should try and help to bring them to Jesus.
Yeah. We should be seeking out those who are lost and trying to bring them to Christ, trying to save them. That was the whole purpose of Jesus living here upon this earth. And again, he's given that work to us as the church to continue and to carry on. I think a lot of times, and this is an illustration here, of course, of the sheep. Generally, when we're talking about sheep, we're talking about those who already belong to the fold, who are already part of Christ's fold. So we might be talking about erring Christians here, right? And what is, and I don't want to drag anybody personally under the bus. That's not my goal in talking about this, but just to get us to think about the idea. Generally, as a church, what do you think our mindset is toward the erring church member? What happens when one of the sheep is lost?
Sometimes you make an excuse for, they had to go to work. They've not been feeling well. And all those are legitimate issues. But chronically, if it's acute situations, it's one thing. But if it becomes a chronic condition where it causes losing soul, then we have a responsibility.
Yeah. And I would say, and again, I'm not thinking about anybody personally here among us. I include myself in this idea. Generally, when somebody, a church member, falls away, we're just like, oh, well, it happens, doesn't it? Do you think we're as concerned as if we lost our wallet? Do you think we're as concerned as if we lost our child? it's a sobering question, but Jesus used this principle to teach us about how important it is to seek and to save the lost. You know, leave the 99 behind and go out there and track down the lost one. When you find them, bring them back and rejoice. Rejoice at what was able to be accomplished. But, you know, I was thinking about over the years, how many of us, you know, how many people do we know that have fallen away from the church? And where are they at now? You know, are we concerned about them still? Are we looking for them? Are we, you know, still trying to work with them, bring them back to the fold? I would venture to say we could probably come up with hundreds of names here tonight of people that we could go see or text or call. I don't know, if you still write letters, you can mail a letter to them. You know, do something to try to help them recognize their condition and come back. But that's an important work, isn't it? That's what Jesus dedicated his life to. That was the purpose for being here. So important work for us to carry on today. If you notice in verse 10, I kind of threw this in because I figured it'd come up in class, but actually in the chapter 18, in about verses 6 through 9, he talks about causing a little one to stumble or causing a Christian to stumble. And then in verse 10, he says, "Take heed that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I say unto you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven." This is a verse that's been used sometimes in the religious world to teach the idea of a personal guardian angel. You know, so the question here is this: does the Bible teach that each of us has a personal guardian angel? What was Jesus talking about there? Got any idea? Ever think about it?
I think it goes back to what he was saying, that you gotta be kind of like one of them. They're looking God in that particular fashion. They don't doubt God. God's watching over us. They believe God.
Yeah. You know, angels, sometimes when you think about angels, people think they're far removed from this world. The Bible actually teaches that they're, Hebrews 1:14, that they're ministering spirits. And they're sent to minister to those who are heirs of salvation. And you think about the story of the Bible. Did angels help usher in God's plan to save mankind? Yeah, they played a role in it, didn't they? But now, from time to time, you have different angels appearing on the scene. You have messages that are delivered. You know, you have them helping carry out and deliver messages and executing out this particular plan. And I think, personally, I think the verse applies to the idea of what Jesus just talked about before in verses 6 through 9, causing one of these little ones to stumble. You don't want to cause another Christian to stumble. You know, you don't want to cause another Christian to be lost. And what he's pointing out there, sometimes, entering into the parable of the lost sheep, we don't assign the same value to every person who's lost, do we? Some people who are lost, we might see as more valuable than others who are lost. God doesn't see us that way. You know, when God sees somebody who's lost, which lost person is most valuable to God? They're all the same, aren't they? And so if we cause one of our brothers to stumble, we might think, it's no big deal, right? This guy over here wasn't very faithful anyway. You know, didn't do a whole lot in the church. But I think what he's pointing out there in verse 10, you know, angels minister to them too, just like they do to all the heirs of salvation. And so it's not just that certain people have higher ranking in the eyes of God or more favor in the eyes of God, but if they're caring for them too, if the goal of angels is everyone's salvation, as it's God's goal, and they want everybody to be saved just like God does, then every one of them would have value to them too. It would be meaningful to them too. So don't think that they're without meaning or representation before God, because all of us are in the same boat when it comes to that fashion. It is an interesting verse, but it certainly doesn't teach the concept or the idea that we all have a personal guardian angel. And I've said it before, if that be the case, some of those personal guardian angels are pretty pitiful, aren't they? They're not doing a very good job for some people. But it is a verse, just be aware of it, that people sometimes talk about and use. Question number 7 here. So what does God's concern for every individual say about the way that we should treat people?
We're all equal.
Yeah, no one should be inconsequential in our eyes. No one should be unimportant in our eyes. Every person counts. And if God cares for everybody equally, then we should care for everybody equally too. You think that's the easy thing to do? I don't think it is, personally anyway.
You know, because we get to thinking about, well, you know, just recently we've been talking about are there levels of reward in heaven, and we've decided, I think, based on many scriptural references, that yes, there are. And if that be the case, then we would have to look at that, keep that in perspective.
Yeah. There's certainly a ranking among angels. We know that for sure. So, anyway, I think as an individual, it's natural to assign more value to a person that you care about, isn't it? Whether it be a family member or a friend or whatever, it's just natural to think, well, you know, this is where all my focus and all my energy should be. But if God has no respect to persons, then do you think He wants us to pour all of our time and all of our energy and efforts into those that we're concerned about, just those that we're concerned about, and those other people we don't think much of, just don't mess with them? Think that's fair?
Love your neighbor.
Yeah. It's not a fair way to treat people, is it? It's certainly not a way that God would treat them. So it is a sobering, that parable of the lost sheep, it's some sobering thoughts to think about. Well, Jesus goes on, we're going to move quickly here. Brother sins against us. There's a formula to follow whenever there's disagreement, argument, conflict, violation of law between brothers and sisters in Christ. But question number 8 is, what are some typical approaches that people, and by people I mean we, often adopt when it comes to conflicts or disagreements? What are some of the ways we approach those things?
Avoidance.
Yeah. How about avoid that person at all costs, right? That's the withdrawal treatment there. You know, you just pretend like you see them in public. You just turn your head and pretend like you don't even see them, right? You walk on the other side of the other side of the street if they're coming down one side. So the avoidance. What else do we do? Tell others about it, right? That's one of the ways we go and we talk to everybody we know and their brother about what they just said about us or how they treated us or what they did to us. How about waiting for them to come to us? Is that one of the ways we deal with it? We don't go to them, right? They're the ones in the wrong. But they need to come to us and we'll deal with it then. How about retaliation or attack? You know, there's a number of ways that we as people typically approach conflicts and disagreements. I just want to point out that's not the way the Bible tells us to approach it. The Bible tells us we don't wait for them to come to us. If a brother sins against you, you go to them. And you try to get that thing sorted out. You don't go around telling everybody about it. You talk to them alone. You don't avoid them at all costs. You try to interact with them every opportunity you get. And question number 9 here is, one of the things, of course, we pointed out, the Bible says, dealing with these conflicts in private. Why do you think that's the best way to try to resolve conflicts or disagreements between brethren?
One reason, you can be more precise on what you want to deal with and not get a bunch of other opinions thrown in there, because at that point, it's still between the two of them.
Yeah. Sometimes you get people involved and people start picking sides and it turns into a big mess, doesn't it? get out of hand pretty quickly. Another thing that I think about is, you know, it's possible in that private setting, it's possible to give that person an opportunity to explain. A lot of times, a lot of conflicts and disagreements among brethren are really just misunderstandings. You know, not all of them, but a lot of them are. Somebody said something, somebody just took it the wrong way or misunderstood it, or they did something, or, you know, I've had people come to me in the back before and say, hey, I'm sorry, the other day you said this, and I said that. And I said, I didn't even realize, you know, and they thought, well, I might have offended you and I didn't want to do that. You know, it's just misunderstandings, things like that. And so if you meet with somebody in private, that's a pretty comfortable setting to kind of, you know, explain, well, I said that, that's not what I meant, you know, when I said it in that particular way. So it's a good situation to give everybody an opportunity to kind of explain and to air things out. Of course, the most extreme measure, if that doesn't work, you're supposed to take some more with you and kind of try to get that person to see they're wrong. The most extreme measure to be taken is what? Yeah, withdrawal, no religious interaction with them. Basically, we treat them just as we would treat any other person who's not connected with the church. You know, we no longer associate with them. To us, they're lost, just like any other lost person would be. And so that's the way we're supposed to treat them. Well, we're out of time. You can read the parable of the unmerciful servant. Forgiveness, that's probably one we should have spent time on. But a lot of good lessons there in the teachings of Christ.